It's 1:01 in the afternoon. My name is Jeff Cyphers, calling the CC Power Board meeting to order. And before we begin, I'm just verifying we have a quorum. And my screen just went black, so I'm going to switch to my laptop. All right. Technology. And I'll just confirm that we didn't have any matters subsequent to posting the agenda. So we'll roll into, and I'll give it a few seconds because I know we just started the meeting, but I'll roll into public comment on any matter that's not listed on the agenda. And I want to see, we do have 3 attendees, although I think I know all of them. I'll just check and see if anyone does have public comment. You can use the raise hand function on the Zoom app. On my screen, it's near the bottom. I don't see any hands up. So I will go to the consent agenda. So we just have the minutes of June 18 on the consent agenda. And are there any corrections or comments on that? Or can we get a motion?
Move approval.
Let's see, that was 3CE motion and Silicon Valley second. Thanks. And so is there any opposition to passing this?
And Vice Chair, I apologize. It's a teleconference meeting, so we need a roll call vote.
Thank you. Let's do a roll call. Appreciate it.
Ava Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Authority,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes. Sorry.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
I'll abstain. I was not in attendance.
All right, thank you. So that concludes the consent agenda, and we'll move to the regular calendar. There are 3 items. We're going to talk about the scope and the timeline for the strategic plan refresh. And then our general manager will talk about a reserve policy draft for discussion, and then give a general report. And this is a relatively light agenda. So I think oh, you're already pulling up the slides. Thanks. And General Manager Morris, do you want me to kick this one off and then you want to add where appropriate? Does that feel right?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay. Super. So for today, oh, I see a hand up from Barb Hale. Go ahead.
Just a point of clarification, please. These items are listed as regular agenda. They aren't listed as for discussion only or for vote. Can you clarify, please?
Discussion only, Director Hale. Thanks.
Thank you.
That might be a good wish list item just to note that in the future agenda items. That's a nice best practice. Thanks for flagging that. So I'll kick this one off, and if you can go to the first slide. A lot of this prep work was done by Lori, our chair, but she's away today, so I'm filling in for her, so I want to give her credit. For today, we're aiming to get all of you starting to think ahead for providing useful input at our October retreat. And so it's about getting input on the planned process for developing a strategic plan update. And to begin, I have a request. I'd love you all, following this meeting, to book like, say, 3 hours to think between now and October and really chew on how to provide high value input in that retreat before we gather in Groveland. So I think there's 2 in my mind, and I'm sure we all have different frameworks of thinking, but in my mind, I think there's sort of long and short term questions that we want to mull over. The way I'm sort of imagining this is that what long-term joint action capabilities make sense to plan ahead for implementation through CC Power versus through other avenues like at Cal CCA or through a contract between 2 or 3 of us or some partnership agreement. And then on the shorter term, what kinds of refinements or additions can we make to our core procurement services that we already have that would increase the organization's value to member, and what other kinds of short-term, say 1 to 3 year types of activities make a lot of sense to develop work plans around. And so on the longer term capacity development, we're aiming to provide enough guidance to staff to steer future budget proposals and staffing decisions, and recognizing also that the ongoing refinements to really long-term things like 5 or 10-year plans, I would at least expect they would continue to evolve somewhat as we learn. And so if you go to the first substantive slide, one of the observations that I think General Manager Morris is pointing out with this slide that I like is that most of the central elements of our 2022 strategic plan appear to be functioning. Joint procurement with an opt-in structure seems to be an idea that works for people. And leaving the door open to other types of joint action also seems to be, at least conceptually, a functional framework. Though I think it's clear to all of us that the priorities about which other types of joint action need some clarity, and we need to help prioritize that for staff. And I'd also add that refinements to the basic joint procurement idea might benefit from your thoughts as well. For example, I've been thinking about what additional or improved services, even around procurement, might increase the value for CC Power for the members. And in my mind, when I think about what's valuable, I'm trying to think about for, say, 4 or 5 of us at least, as opposed to, 1 or 2 of us, because then that's probably more of a bilateral kind of situation. So if you go to the approach and timeline, I'll just kind of run through this and then open it up for a discussion. So Alex is gathering input and responses to individual interests, and we'll be sending out a survey we'll get to in the next slide. And Lori has asked me to form an ad hoc committee today to work with Alex to really prep for that event in October and make sure we're heading into it with a lot of substance and get the results out that we need. And so she's asked me to appoint herself, Howard, Mitch, and me to work with our general manager on fleshing all that out, and especially key questions for the retreat, and likely some straw man proposals, and to ensure that Alex and his team have sufficient clarity from the board to plan ahead. I think we're aiming to use the discussion and input from the retreat to then propose and hopefully adopt a detailed update to the plan by the end of this calendar year. And so the next slide shows a few of the types of questions that General Manager Morris is exploring. And if you haven't already read through these, I encourage you to kind of read through them slowly later. And then also, and you can certainly add to this, General Manager Morris, but I'd encourage all of you to reach out to Alex with ideas for other valuable survey questions between, as we're gathering this input from members in September. And these are just some ideas to get the creative juices flowing for today. So I think that's probably enough to open this up and talk about the process and framing and timing. What we're setting aside for today is trying to talk about specific proposals, because we kind of want to reach some agreement about the framework first for those discussions, and then use the time between now and the retreat as prep time for all of us, and then use the retreat to try to reach some agreement on things. But I want to open it up at this point, and maybe I'll start with you, General Manager Morris.
Thanks, Vice Chair Cypers. I just want to say on behalf of CC Power, I really appreciate all the board members focusing on CC Power and sinking your teeth into this strategic plan. It will help us to build and execute a go-forward plan off the 2022 strategic plan. I think we've adhered well to that plan, but that plan was fairly open-ended. And so a good outcome would be, I think, a little more alignment on some long-term strategic goals we may want to have, and then how we build towards that. I think we've made a lot of progress getting the core structures implemented, and it feels like a useful time to check in with everybody and allow for the board to sort of pivot or redirect or shape this again. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and this survey will be a really important tool here where we hope to gather some data to help. And that data would then, in the right ways inform the ad hoc committee so that we're really working with direct member input as we draw up straw proposals, et cetera. So I'm happy to answer any further questions, but Vice Chair Cyphers, I think, teed it up well, and I look forward to hearing comments.
And maybe just before turning to any further input on this, I'll just check in with council. So is my stating a wish to form an ad hoc committee sufficient for forming an ad hoc committee, or do I need to do anything further on that?
That's sufficient. We just want consensus from the board as to who would serve on that and that everyone's comfortable with that approach moving forward.
Super. So input on that would be welcome as well. Thanks. And I'll open the floor, and maybe we could take the slides down unless somebody wants to look at those so I can see everybody. Any input on this process? I know this is a very light kind of touch on this topic, so if you're hungry to dive in, I understand why, but maybe channel that energy into like writing things down. Okay, Director Chang.
Well, thanks for teeing this up. I've been part of some conversations with Alex and a smaller subset of folks to just talk about process and what we want to do in October. So I appreciate the efforts here. I wanted to flag, I'm generally in alignment on the process. A couple thoughts / concerns of what my interest is in sort of October and what we're going to get out of it. My sense is CC Power covers a pretty broad spectrum of priorities. There's obviously 9 CCAs here represented, and we all have various good ideas for things that could be of strategic importance for CC Power. So my interest is try to hone in on what the smaller subset of priorities are that we would all generally agree on, and provide some more direction to Alex and CC Power to help really, focus that effort. So I guess I'm going to throw out there whether we want to try to drive this group to get to that consensus in October, or are we just trying to provide direction for Alex then to go run with that and to get that direction. But that's just something I'll throw out there, is like, my interest is to really try to get to a smaller subset of things, because I think there's a lot of great ideas out there, and that has created maybe a little bit more churn and uncertainty as to what those priorities are. So I think that would be a value. The other thing I'll just flag is the time frame that we're focused on. I know that this specifically notes 2030 to 2035. And so we're sort of skipping the next 5 years and going beyond that. And just want to note that may be very logical, because what we're talking about are longer term plans. And of course, there are still many things that we would need to do in the next 5 years to sort of seed some of that work. Or would we want to bring that in a little bit? And my personal opinion is I think there may be a benefit in bringing that a little bit. I don't know what the perfect time frame is, but it feels like maybe too much of a jump to jump 5 years out. And I'm not sure that there's enough clarity on the priorities for the next 5 years. And the last thing I'll just say is I don't necessarily have an interest in redoing the 2022 strategic plan, but if you could recirculate that, Alex, that would be useful. I wasn't part of that original process, and it's just making sure people are on the same page with that particular plan to consider whether we want to at least adapt that or pivot in a slightly different direction off of that. Those are my comments.
This is rich input. I'll respond briefly. I think it's certainly my hope and intention that we try to converge in October and reach a strong consensus on those issues. And I'd like to work toward that goal. I think the backup plan is that we keep working on it in November if we have more work to do, but I'd love to try. And so I think if we set that as an intention, if there's not disagreement about that, it does focus us on the prep work. And I think that prep work is pretty important. And I hear you on the short term should not be excluded from this. I think the slide, I think this is the intention, was to think about the capacity building elements of long-term needs now, but not to exclude the short term. And I think the slide maybe just didn't state that. Is that fair, Alex?
I actually think that's a good example of where we may not have full alignment across the board on what to focus on.
Okay.
So, that could be really good. And in the survey, for instance, if I could tee up that question and then bring that back to the ad hoc.
Okay. I want to turn to Mitch next, but it may also be worth taking a few minutes today to chat about what distinction we're trying to make about the short-term kind of objectives and work plan. I think we may find if we talk with each other today, we may not have as big a disagreement I'm kind of guessing. So let me start with Mitch and then I'll go to Monica second.
Well, actually, Howard brought up a few of the items that I was going to, Jeff, I'd kind of like to pull on that thread that you just mentioned too. I mean, you talked about the potential for alignment around this sort of shorter term. That's what I was wondering too, is sort of what's happening within this next couple of year window. I think I have a sense of it, but maybe Alex, you could speak to that directly and I guess with the goal of maybe starting to get a bit of alignment around some of this, just or more understanding, I suppose. And then the last, just the other comment that I guess I would add to is that part of the survey, I would suggest maybe having at least a question or two on what's worked well so far. It's not just a look forward. I think that can be informed by what the members perceive as what has worked well. That could be, from my perspective, that could be useful information to get. But I think that sort of interim period that is a gap right now. That's what I'm more interested in. So,
Vice Chair Cyphers, may I respond quickly, or do you want to keep going? So great questions, Treasurer Sears. If you go back to the 2022 strategic plan, which I know you're very familiar with, one thing it overestimated was how quickly new work would occur. So if you look at that plan, it's quite interesting. It lays out a 3-year vision, sort of like a 22, 23, or 23, 24, 25. And in some ways, we're still in the first year of that plan. In the first year, there was a strong focus on execution on projects under contract and getting projects to the finish line up and running. From my perspective, that's still clearly the top priority and where we are focusing most of our efforts, while we're spooling up the additional work, which is tee up additional ideas for joint action, explore that for members. And so I see the next couple years near term is really critical for executing on the contracts and then mapping out some additional ideas. And the way we've approached looking at additional ideas is there's a few ways we do it. One would be this idea of road mapping, and so that members can react and see if there's logic or interest. We also have done these assessments of particular ideas where we've looked at if there might be joint action value there. And so we have a couple tools for how we tee up these future potential offerings, but that might be another thing that we look at structurally to say, is this teeing up the right opportunities for members, and does that work or not? And so that was your point about what's working well. I think we should include a little of that in the survey. And given all that information, then the board may better shape and direct what timeline we focus on. Is it 27 to 32? Assuming we do a 5-year look, so we can get that input from the board.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Director Padilla.
Certainly ditto on what Howard and Mitch said. You know, I think we should also spend a little bit of time talking about not necessarily what we want to accomplish or what we should set our minds to, but actually how we get it done. And I think that, you know, how we work together and how we're governed as an agency is very critical in our ability to successfully pursue opportunities and actually execute on them too. And so I know when we formed with this concept that the JPA was the best model to get this done. But maybe taking an opportunity to look at, you know, is this the best model to get strategic initiatives done? Or what are other models, or how could we better align ourselves for execution? And then I think also we were born out of, I think, a need to, for the most part, do joint procurement, a lot of it being driven by the midterm reliability procurement orders and the need to accelerate some joint procurement efforts there. But maybe taking a step back and seeing like what are the opportunities or the things that we really need to focus on, and more importantly, what are we good at? And then what are we not good at doing? And not try to over deliver and on our you know, like not set something expectations that aren't realistic for ourselves. So perhaps now is a good time, or at the retreat, to kind of do that. And then I appreciate your comment about looking for 2 to 3 hours to just think. The way my mind works, though, I need a little more prompting, a little more boundaries, and a little more direction. Because if you give me 2 to 3 hours with a blank slate, I am not going to think about this stuff. I can tell you that. So give me some homework before the retreat so that I can best be prepared.
Challenge accepted.
Thank
That's a great idea. Okay. All right, we'll go to Director Shaw.
Thank you, Chair Sears. I really appreciate sort of the discussion, and I think also just in light of where we are, I want to recognize staff's work on sort of moving the agency forward. So, Alex, I think that a lot has happened since you've come on as the GM, and so just want to recognize that it's not an easy procurement space, and then to do that in a joint space is tough. And I think the focus has been, can we deliver on these projects and the structure? And I appreciate all the work that's gone into that. I think, and maybe building a little bit on what Monica was just sharing, at least in with very large boards and a lot of diversity among boards, one of the areas that I think could be helpful, and General Manager Morris would be interested in your thoughts on this, would be not just what are we going to do, or to Monica's comment, how are we going to do that, but also getting some board consensus about what we're not going to do. I think that discipline is good for board members so that staff isn't being sort of brought individual one-off requests with a sense of like, I need to move this forward because I'm being asked to do it. If we have a consensus of this is what we're not going to do, and there's a board member that wants to bring it forward, then that goes to the chair for a conversation. Does the chair want to bring it to the full board for consideration? And then we could always do the thing, but it starts from a place of this is outside the bounds of what we all agreed we were focused on. And I think that could be a good disciplinary overlay to this discussion about what are we going to do. So that's one thing to consider. And then the other piece that I would like to offer, if I heard the members of the ad hoc, the proposed ad hoc together, if I heard it, it was Jeff, maybe it was Chair Cipher or Chair.
So Lori Mitchell,
Yes, thank you.
Howard Chang, Mitch Sears, and myself were proposed by Lori.
Okay.
I'm happy to take changes as maybe don't recommend removing our chair because she's not here to defend herself.
Yeah, the only
If I
thing
may.
I wanted to suggest is I think having those folks that are on this call that have been at CC Power, have seen that joint operation, have seen how projects work together, have looked at scheduling or dispatching and joint services, could be really helpful as part of that conversation. I know Lori has some exposure there, and maybe that's enough, but I would encourage Lori to think about having Monica or Barb sort of join that group, because I think there's just a lot of experience there that we don't want to lose as part of the framing of the discussion.
I'll just offer if Monica or Barb wish to accept that, I'd be happy to step back and make room. So I think that's certainly fine with me. I see.
Also,
Barb
just
has her
highlight
hand.
that you don't want that group to be unruly, but technically 5 is not a quorum, so you could have just add and not necessarily replace yourself.
It makes me a little nervous because if you have one accidental phone call, you're in trouble. So I like having one accidental conversation being possible. So anyway, I'll check in. I see Barb Hale's got her hand up, so I'll turn to you and we can check in on that later again.
Thanks. I had 3 things. So the first one was clarification on the ad hoc committee membership. So thank you for that. So that's clear. And their task is to prepare the straw man proposal that's on the next steps. Is that their task? Yes.
And to work with staff to do everything that we know how to make the retreat effective and productive so that it's not just a discussion. It's a discussion that's very focused and driven toward a conclusion. So I think that's how I see it.
Okay, and then I support Monica's request that the task be modified to include homework for the 3-hour, for a productive 3-hour homework assignment. So that was, and with that, I endorse the concept, and the membership. If it would be helpful, I'm happy to join it. So happy to do that. On the survey, I wanted to agree with Director Sears' comments and also suggest that maybe some questions on what's contributing to the churn. I think we're all recognizing that there's some churn, and we're thinking that a more focused strategic plan conversation will help us address that, but maybe we should get better informed as to what folks think is contributing to there being a churn. So I would suggest that as an add to the survey. And then the third item is I just wanted to agree with Director Shaw on understanding, you know, what we want to focus on is important, but also being very explicit about what we aren't doing. I think that's an important piece of this picture. So thank you.
Thank you. This is fantastic input. All right, Director Padilla again.
Yeah, I'm happy to help out as well, but I'll leave it to the chair of the board, Director Mitchell, to decide, since Barb is also happy to help too, and I don't want to violate a Brown Act rule or anything, so it's up to you guys. No hurt feelings if they pick Barb over me, though, by the way.
I think we do have to make a decision today in this,
Oh.
at least in a public meeting, I believe. Is that true, Council?
Yeah, we would want to have consensus with the board on
Okay.
who the 4 members will be.
Okay,
So,
then I'm happy to give it to Barb since she spoke up first.
and she's shaking her head.
Okay,
I
I'm
was
happy
just
to do
gonna
it.
cede it to you. I took myself off mute to cede it to you, Monica, so.
All right, I'll do it if that's
Okay,
fine.
so we'll have Lori, Howard, Mitch, and Monica. Thank you.
Just quick comment on that, Chair Cyphers. Director Padilla, thank you. We worried we had worn you out on the budget ad hoc committee. So I think what Chair Mitchell might say is great. You're welcome. We had been trying to give you a breather.
But we'll take your expert advice too, if you've got the time. Okay, this is, by the way, I just love having an expert team of consultants help shape things, because this is all really excellent input. And then I'll encourage our chair to watch this video and discussion as well. Is there anything further before we move on? And recognizing if you have thoughts following this meeting, you've still got a venue to share them, right? So I'd encourage you to go through staff so that we don't accidentally do a Brown Act problem. But send ongoing thoughts to Alex, and we will certainly get you homework. That'll be, or I guess I will be less involved in that, but I'll encourage the ad hoc to produce some guiding questions and things for the homework. And I'm not seeing more hands raised. So I think this does come back to you, General Manager, and happy to have you wrap this and move to the next item. Thanks.
Well, I think this really gives us the starting point we need, and I'll work with the ad hoc and be on the lookout for the survey, and I'll probably send a draft of the survey to the ad hoc, but we really want to get that survey out and give people time to think, and then we'll develop some homework as suggested. So thanks, everybody. Perfect start.
So we will move to the draft reserves policy. This is yours. Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks, everybody. We don't have a slide here, but I've worked with Treasurer Mitch Sears on a hodgepodge of sort of treasurer-related issues that have come up over the last 6 months, and there's been a desire to have a policy on it. The main topic was, you know, what does CC Power need from a cash liquidity standpoint as a small operating entity? And how should we approach that? We've used the word reserves for that, but I did want to clarify that we're not talking about credit standing oriented reserves. We're really talking about short-term, small liquidity issues that, you know, may crop up in emergency situations and are pretty unlikely. So over the past 2 years, we've been accumulating some extra reserves. And then we know the board has also said, under what circumstances would we use these reserves? How do we get notified? And so we've rolled that into this draft policy. And then lastly, we wanted to add in this idea of how do we think about reserves with respect to carrying such reserves forward if there's extra, returning that money to members, or offsetting future invoicing. And so this policy is trying to accomplish a bunch of related items and do it in the right way that's flexible yet clear and direct with the right amount of board control. So what we landed on is that CC Power has a model where we collect G&A dollars, we collect phase 1 dollars. But with phase 2 and phase 3 dollars, those are really still tracked at the member level and only should be used when you opt in for a project. Further, phase 3 typically has its own cash and invoicing approach that's embedded in any contract. And since that's a core aspect, we sort of view phase 3 as funding itself based on if members opt into that work or not. So this left us trying to develop, identify how much reserves we would need for sort of small G&A phase 1 operations. And so where Treasurer Sears and I landed as a draft proposal for today was, 6 months of potential cash needs for G&A only, or really phase 1 only, is a pretty small number for CC Power. And that's probably a prudent approach for a near-term reserves target. And then further, we said, you can only use it under these circumstances, emergencies, or based if the board wants us to use it. We could only roll some of it over into reserves if there's extra, and the rest of it should be returned. And then lastly, we shouldn't impact members by harmfully by trying to collect the reserves quickly. So we would always be collecting it over a 5-year time frame. And so what that would do is it would allow us to gradually accumulate these reserves. We're currently estimating that to be about 1 to 1.5 million. And CC Power already has collected some of that, so we probably have half of that already. And so this would be a way to get started and build a reserves that's controlled and directed by the board under this policy. And then over time, if needed, we could revisit the policy. So I wanted to ask Treasurer Sears if you had anything you wanted to add about this or any of our thinking, and then we can have some quick discussion.
Yeah, I think you, Alex, I think you summarized it pretty well. We spent a couple of meetings discussing sort of what the options were. Where we sort of landed was the concept of trying to keep at least this initial policy as streamlined and simple as possible. And with the idea that over time, as we sort of learn about the way that the reserve accounts work, how much they're going to be actually utilized, which we anticipate being quite minimal, that there may be opportunities going forward to refine. So the idea here was to keep it simple and straightforward, and as sort of a first effort, and revisit on an as-needed basis, unless there's something obviously that we really missed here, if there were any sort of red flags from the board. So that's really all I wanted to add, other than to say, Alex, I think jumped in on this and really spent some time thinking these questions through. So thanks, Alex.
I have a few administrative requests when this comes back, and I'd love to turn for further comments. I just like this to be organized a little bit so that we can refer to specific paragraphs by number and things like that, and probably just clean it up a little bit as far as the drafting. One question I have, and maybe this is for council, is does it make sense for us to be specific about the allowed investments, like referring to government code? I think it's 53601, just by reference, or is that kind of overly cautious at this point?
I do think that's a good point, and we can certainly take care of that as part of the cleanup.
I think that might help signal to the rest of us that there's a limit on the types of investments that's specific rather than general. So, okay, I'll turn to Director Hale.
Thank you. I appreciate the work on this, Director Sears. And Manager Morris. I wanted to make sure I'm understanding the carryover concept that you have included here. It says carried over or returned to members. For those funds that are specific to a member, would the carryover come in the form of a reduction in a new assessment?
Yes, Director Hale, that's the intent. That would be subject though to certain accounting conventions. For instance, it would probably be cumbersome to take something that's like a damages payment and convert that to general and administrative dollars from an accounting standpoint. So our accountant has advised us that the carryover is makes sense from a cash management standpoint, but it could add complexity from a GAAP accounting standpoint. So he would only recommend allowing carryovers in cases where it's sort of a apples to apples carryover. For instance, if you have extra G&A dollars, you want to roll that to offset G&A dues, that's fine. But we couldn't really switch categories of funds very easily with a carryover.
And by categories of fund, you mean between project and G&A?
That and really between accounting categories, like if it's an administrative category, you can use it to offset administrative, but you shouldn't really do that with a damages payable or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
All right, Director Shaw.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sears. One just quick clarification, the liquidity reserve, I'm trying to understand sort of a scenario where that would be utilized, or is it more akin to sort of working capital? You know, as we get more projects online, is that sort of how that would be called upon to use?
Good language there, Director Shaw. I think it's working capital, but really only for G&A and phase one, which is sort of really just administrative staff, benefits, things like that. And typically we wouldn't need it if invoices come in timely. But a good example would be if we approve a budget in June, we issue invoices July 1st. We may not get funds into the account until, say, mid-August or August. And so there's always going to be this small window where we could be potentially facing liquidity issues. I don't see this as a high risk, but having a small buffer that could be used would be the appropriate way to address it per this policy.
Okay. The other thing that's helpful framing, so I can understand how you want to use that. I think it might be more working capital than a liquidity reserve, but
okay,
I'll let you guys struggle with that. The other thing is just how important the previous discussion flows into this, because I think one of the challenges around is the phase two projects and the example of the large phase two project. So a really good budget, one strategic process, getting us aligned, budget process, so that we're not putting really significant dollars into CC Power where those might not happen, or the allocation of those projects may not happen, is going to be really important as we move forward. So I appreciate the work here.
Thank you. All right, Director Chang.
Thanks. I appreciate Rob's comments. I had a similar question, just sort of on how do we sort of define reserves and what the use is. Maybe to continue that line of thinking is how you described it, I think of as more working capital than for reserves, at least how we define things for our agency. And maybe one suggestion to consider is whether we maintain some level of sort of membership dues that are retained purely for working capital / retained by CC Power to help manage a budget. And then there's a separate pool of money that is project specific. And if a project moves forward, those funds are very specifically for a project that moves forward, and we can bucket things out, which I think is similar to what you're already saying. I think that the new piece I'm offering is there a benefit in having some of these membership dues known to be retained by CC Power? So yes, of course, it helps to manage working capital, but also if CC Power does not spend it the following year, it is just part of CC Power's balance sheet. Those dollars are probably not going to grow to balloon to be a huge amount of money, but ultimately it is on CC Power's balance sheet. And of course, there's amongst the members a discussion always be had of how do you spend that money that gets approved in a budget. but it doesn't need to be, say, returned year to year or accounted for year to year. It is just part of the financial sort of standing of CC Power. And of course, there's a separate bucket of money that is solely for projects specifically and has to get approval on a case-by-case basis. So that's one suggestion to throw out there.
Thank you, Director Chang.
There might be some differences between JPAs and cities, so I'll turn to Director Hale.
Thank
For
you.
your-
I just want to react to, and maybe this was just, maybe I'm putting too much weight on the language that was chosen, Director Chang, but you used you said something to the effect of, does it need to be accounted for? And I think that we need to be, I think that the organization needs to be ready to open its books and show exactly where the money is and whose money it is, to the extent it's not G&A. It is showing up on the organization's balance sheet, but it is our ratepayers' money when it is not a G&A. And I just want to caution you to anticipate, Director Morris, that you may be asked by a city to produce the documentation, and we're going to have to be accounted. And hopefully we'll have a practice of doing that accounting and sharing it with each member on an annual basis, so we will understand how carry forwards relate to funds already provided and new assessments, new invoices. Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Let me just check, if I may, Director Padilla, let me just check if Director Chang wanted to just close out that topic before, is that okay? Director
Yeah,
Padilla?
that was my intention, if that's all right. I'm seeing Monica not go off mute, so I'll assume that's the case. So I appreciate that, and certainly I agree with your caution there, Director Hale. And maybe my clarification is, or question too, is distinguishing what we're talking as referring to as G&A and non-G&A. I was actually speaking to it as if it were G&A. So to the extent we're speaking about a pool of money that is explicitly non-G&A, then I have maybe some confusion, and some clarification would be helpful, GM Morris, just to help define really what pool of money are we talking about here that is non-G&A, but also not project specific.
Just a quick response there, Director Chang. Yeah, I think we should be careful. There's accounting language, right? And I want to make sure everybody knows I'm not the accountant, so I would want to check on how this is tagged. That said, in our operating model, we have G&A for covering certain things that are clearly G&A, but then we have the phase one, which is sort of idea exploration, not necessarily G&A, but also not project specific. So phase one does sit kind of in this world between project specific and not G&A. And that's one where we can look at how do we account and tag that money in an accounting standpoint, what's appropriate for it. And I agree with, as Director Hale indicated, that needs to be really clear, how we track it, whose money it is, how it's treated, et cetera. So allow me, if everybody's okay with it, to work with Director Sears on making sure the policy properly addresses these key questions, and then we'll decide if there's further discussion needed on it.
Okay, I do want to go to Director Padilla too, though, but thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have much to add here. I certainly appreciate that we are developing a policy and hopefully a transparent policy and an audible way to track funds. My only request is that we try to keep that potentially excess dollars or reserve, things that would go towards reserve, as low as possible, right? There's no reason that we should be holding excess money at CC Power. And, if I want to invest money, I'll invest it through our own policies that my board has adopted. I don't want to have the secondary investment policy that now could be subject to my own board scrutiny as well, right? Because there are our dollars. And so I would just caution that we not try to go there, that we try to budget appropriately and collect the amount that we need for G&A and for the phases. And then how we manage or operate the resources that are coming online once they come online. I mean, I know that that's going to be a whole different kind of account, maybe not a reserve, but just like an account that we use to pay off our bills and stuff, or receive money from the ISO. So, but that's my caution, is that we don't try to build a reserve for investment purposes at CC Power.
I think that resonates with me, and I think maybe my input would just be, think about this in concert with other strategies to improve liquidity as well, such as really timely invoicing, maybe even early invoicing, maybe notices to us that an invoice has gone out so we can make sure like we're bird dogging it within our system. Whatever those other strategies might be, that might help lower the risk of needing a large reserve. So, but I like where you're on with this, and I think we've heard the director's input at this point. Is there anything else before we move on? Okay, and I think you've captured the questions from an accounting and auditing standpoint that need to be answered. So we will go on to the general manager report. Thanks.
All right. Well, once again, thanks. It's a privilege to work with you guys, and I wanted to share a bunch of updates. So we'll start with some project updates, and I welcome questions as we go. There's not too much material to cover here. So on the project side, generally, I would say there's good news. Tumbleweed is moving forward. Here's the latest photo from Tumbleweed as the project is actively in construction. As a reminder, this would be the 8-hour storage project coming online next spring. And some of the activity related to Tumbleweed has been the construction being managed by the developer, but then on our side, gearing up and getting ready for scheduling coordinator and optimization vendor needs, and then activating the operations advisory subcommittee, which is actually the first OAS we've ever had. So, it's been great for normalizing that part of the CC Power process. And it's another, I think, tribute to your staff that they're actively engaged in helping us work this out optimally for everyone. So Tumbleweed's moving forward, and that's generally going well. On Goal Line, just wanted everybody to know that project on the contract side has now been terminated and settled. This was something that the board discussed, and so that is now terminated and settled. And the next step there with Goal Line, which is also a first, is when we have a project like that ends up being terminated, how do we close out our process side of it with our members? And so the intent would be to fully close that out. If there's extra funds there, we move the funds back to the members, and then that project advisory subcommittee and project effort is essentially terminated and won't exist inside CC Power structure anymore. So we'll be working that out as well with the members. The settlement has been received, and so now really there's a question of, do we keep a structure in place, or do we just close things out quickly and refund everybody the money that they have in their project balance accounts? So that's Goal Line. On Fish Lake, there's been a lot of effort to get visibility to when that project will come online. So we have some work on amendments there, and keeping it in good standing with the letter of credit. And so that geothermal project is still being worked on. And then lastly, there's an array of other updates. We've been executing on numerous phase 2s where we're actively exploring new project opportunities for members and specifically trying to negotiate offtake opportunities. We've developed a draft of a BTA direct payer ownership report. So you may recall when we did the BTA over a year ago, it took us a while, but we wanted to sort of see what the lessons learned were. The angle here was not just on ownership per se, but really on direct pay. And so you'll see in this report, which is a draft right now, how the One Big Beautiful Bill changes or doesn't change things for direct pay and where that may be relevant. And so that will be useful for you and your staff, we hope. And it also may inform future ownership discussions, if any. We're setting up a geothermal site tour for many of our members, particularly on some of our projects. We are evaluating multiple geothermal projects. And so the site tour will help everybody sink their teeth into the actual mechanics of it. It'll probably give a little more experience to staff about the permitting and operating challenges for geo. And so we're looking forward to that. That will be in September. And then lastly, in line with the work plan, we're starting the process of working with members on transmission and distribution related opportunities and strategies. This is what I would call a strategic assessment, where we want to look at this area for possible joint action. And the way we're doing it is we're starting with education, get everyone on the same page with all these various aspects of transmission and distribution work, cost recovery, financing, et cetera. And then we'll go from there into possible joint action ideas we may want to look at. But the first step is underway, getting the education work set up through this RFP. Any questions on project updates before I move on? Okay, just wanted to remind everyone on the member forum, it's coming up. So we've requested all board members and or their staff RSVP. The general sense for this is that we want all the board members to attend, and then they can bring 1 to 2 additional staff. A likely staffer you may want to consider bringing would be your procurement director or your alternate. So we have the right people in the room for having this discussion that was teed up earlier. And we'll be meeting at the Rush Creek Lodge in Groveland, California. We'll meet starting at lunch on Tuesday, October 21st. We'll have a whole, I'd say, very full afternoon of meetings, and you'll get a more detailed agenda of what that work session will look like. You'll also have been given your homework, as we heard today, so everybody will come in ready to go, and we'll have the ad hoc ready to shape and steer discussions. We'll have a board dinner, and then the next day, with an eye towards really understanding infrastructure type ownership and sort of enriching everybody's thinking, and will be the Hetch Hetchy Dam site tour facilitated by Director Hale with San Francisco. So thank you. And then for folks interested, there's some optional activities given that we're pretty far out there that afternoon, but some may want to head home immediately. So all of that should, more detail will come, and I'm looking forward to that a lot. Okay, and then just wanted to also follow up. So for the first time, we've been issuing a more sophisticated series of invoices following the budget approval. The plan was to do G&A in July, which is complete, phase 1 invoices in August, and then the sort of unallocated advanced phase 2 invoices in September. Since we're proposing to do these new phase 1 invoices and then these advanced phase 2 invoices, we needed to have some paperwork and in the form of a cost share agreement associated with that. So we have set that up. That cost share agreement for phase 1 is now complete. And so the invoices will be rolling out soon. And then we'll be working on a similar cost share agreement for phase 2. And then those invoices will come towards the end of September. So all of that is pursuant to the budget, but the paperwork side of it in the form of these cost share agreements had not been done. So thanks to your staff for reviewing the cost share agreement and making sure it's workable, and we think we've landed in a good place. And then lastly, I had a bunch of items from GM activity I wanted to report out. Recall we did not have a July meeting, so this covers 2 months. It covers June and July instead of just 1 month. So Goal Line, we issued a termination notice on June 20th. That sort of triggered the plan to settle and terminate there. That was based on an event of default and a demand for payment of the development security. As part of that, we worked with Goal Line, who they were working to repurpose the site. It's not proposed at all to be used for wholesale market power applications at all. And so part of that was to include a new third party called Gem Tulip, which is seeking to develop the site for real estate purposes. And so they became part of the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement was signed on July 7th. And as part of that, CC Power received the damages payment for the event of default, and all claims were released. So that effectively ended the contractual side with the counterparty, and that's all terminated. We still have our situation where we're tracking the members' money underneath this energy storage, we have the third contract that with us versus our members. And so we want to wrap that up by getting rid of the money, and that would end by refunding the money to you, and that would end the agreement between CC Power and the members for holding your funds. So we'll be working on that in the next month. Some additional ones on the next slide. We completed the master cost sharing agreement. What we found was that all the cost share agreements were, say, 90% the same. And so what we did is we set up a master agreement, and now any additional agreements can kind of conform and come in under that structure, easing some of the review process by members in CC Power. So that's now established. And then lastly, we use that master cost share structure for multiple items. We used it for the geothermal strategic origination, long duration storage, phase 2B, one geothermal project, and then a second geothermal phase 2 project. So it's been working out nicely. And as part of that, when we do these confirms, we issue invoices, but these are really project specific invoices where members will have project account balance statements associated with it. And so I think that concludes my GM report, and I welcome any questions or discussion, Vice Chair Cyphers.
Thank you. That was a good report. And echo the thanks to Director Hale for offering this tour. I've been waiting for this my whole life, so I'm very excited. Any comments on the manager's report or questions? Not seeing any. Okay. So that will bring us to any individual member items. Any news to report? I'll start. So we have formally offered service to Lake County finally. We've been through that process, and we are now doing 2 to 3 presentations in Lake County a week, and we will see if they say yes. It's not certain. They've got all kinds of questions, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I'll let you know by the end of October, I hope. So that's my update. Not seeing other hands. Cool. All right. Well, we will adjourn the meeting at 1:57 p.m. Thanks, everyone, and I look forward to all the homework that's going to come forward.
Thanks, Mike.
And book your 3 hours now so that you have time in September or before. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.